Welcome to the chosen bloom. The strongest chains are never forged from iron. They are built from control. And the very instant you refuse to bow to that control, those chains dissolve. Let this truth settle in, chosen one. Picture it, a puppet held by invisible strings, its arms pulled, its movements dictated. The puppet dances, but not by choice. It is predictable, obedient, owned. Yet what happens the day the strings are cut? The puppet master does not rejoice. He trembles because without control, he is nothing. That moment is your story. Here is what few ever realize: control exists only if you consent to it. Power itself is not real unless others recognize it. Even the mightiest empires in history did not fall by sword or fire, they crumbled because people stopped believing. When faith was withdrawn, thrones turned to dust. This is not opinion, but truth written again and again across the ages. Freedom outlasts submission. And you, chosen one, are the living proof of that freedom. They branded you the problem not because you were wrong, not because you destroyed, but because you refused to be controlled. For that, I honor you. For standing here now, unbroken, I thank you. So I ask you, help me carry this light. Press like, press subscribe, and let this message reach more souls. The illusions must break, the chains must fall, and it is our task to set others free. You are part of a force far greater than you know. And now, return to the heart of this revelation. The truth is rising. They finally see it. They finally understand. You were never the problem. The real problem was never you. The problem was their hunger for control. Imagine a hand losing its grip on a rope it does not admit weakness. Instead, it blames the rope for slipping away. That is exactly what they did to you. When their hold could no longer bind you, they twisted the story. They painted you as reckless, unstable, even the villain. But beneath the noise, the truth remained clear. They simply could not puppeteer you anymore. They could no longer dictate your words, your steps, your choices. And so, in their frustration, they turned you into their enemy. Yet here lies the irony: they were never truly fighting you. They were at war with their own powerlessness. It was not your freedom that terrified them, but the mirror it held up. They saw themselves stripped of command, stripped of influence, stripped of the illusion of control. That reflection is what drove their fear. You did not rage. You did not fight. You simply walked away from their script. And in that silence, the entire stage collapsed. History speaks of this same truth. What kings feared most was not rebellion, but indifference. When people stopped listening, the throne meant nothing. When the audience left, the actors became just people in costumes. That is what your absence accomplished. Without your presence, their crown was revealed for what it truly was, nothing more than paper. And now, chosen one, the cracks are showing. Their story no longer holds. The world, or at least those closest around you, can see it. You did not start the chaos. You did not pick the fight. All you ever did was refuse to be owned. That refusal is the twist, the moment the script flips. And now their accusations, their lies, their noise sound desperate, hollow, weak. Because beneath it all, everyone knows the truth. Hold this truth like a shield. Chosen one, you were never the problem. You were the one they could never control. And when control is all someone possesses, losing it feels like losing everything. That is why they feared you. That is why they smeared your name. That is why they wanted the world to believe you were dangerous. But the truth is clear. You were never dangerous to people, you were only dangerous to their illusion. For the universe has a way of exposing what is false. It shines its light until every lie is seen for what it is. And now that light is breaking through, people are beginning to notice the circus for what it always was, a stage built on pretense. and without your presence to play their part, the show has collapsed into silence. The most powerful thing you can do in this moment is simple smile. Their loss of control is not your burden. It is their truth catching up with them. Chosen one, you have broken free from the oldest trick in existence. You slipped out of the grasp of those who needed you small, quiet, and obedient. But now, standing in your own power, the universe itself bears witness. It reveals that the brokenness was never yours. It was their grip that was weak. So before we go further, I ask you to anchor this truth within yourself. Drop a comment with 777 to claim your freedom, and let the universe echo it back. And if your spirit feels moved, bless this channel with your support through a like, a share, or even a gift. Every ounce of energy you give strengthens this mission, carrying light into places still shadowed by illusion. Remember this, chosen one. When you stand in your power, you do more than free yourself, you awaken others to do the same. The ripple you set in motion cannot be stopped. Thank you for standing here, for choosing freedom over control. Now we move step by step. If you are truly the chosen one, you will feel the pull to stay, because what follows will confirm why they could never hold you. Number 1, their hatred was never yours to carry. It was the fear of losing control. The insecure will always call freedom a threat because it exposes how little power they actually have. Understand this, chosen one. Their hatred was never about your heart, your character, or your intent. It was about the simple fact that they could not grip you like a rope and drag you where they wished. You slipped from their hands, and that terrified them. Hatred is not born from truth. It is born from fear. The moment you stopped playing the role they wrote, fear hardened into hostility. Picture a fist clutching sand, squeezing tighter as if pressure could make it stay. The harder the grip, the faster the grains run free. That is what happened with you. The more they tried to bend, shape, and own you, the more you revealed that you cannot be reduced to dust in anyone's palm. And when the sand escaped, they would not admit that control was never theirs. They blamed the sand. They blamed you. The honest chosen one. How many times were you called stubborn, rebellious, arrogant, or hard to love? Those were not truths. They were tools. Words designed not to describe you but to shame you into silence. They were not angry because you were wrong. They were angry because you were right, and you dared to live like it. You had a backbone. You refused to fold. And nothing unsettles those who crave control more than the sight of someone standing tall. Here is the hard truth. Control only works when the controlled agree to remain silent. But you did not. You asked questions. You made your own choices. You did not wait for permission slips from people who believed they owned your path. Each decision you claimed for yourself became a crack in their armor. Every no you spoke weakened their illusion of authority. And when they finally saw they could not stop you, they cast you as the villain in their story. But let us turn the lens. What they named arrogance was your self-respect. What they condemned as disrespect was you drawing a sacred line in the sand. What they whispered as difficult was simply your refusal to betray your own spirit. The truth is, you were not waging war against them. You were not plotting, not even trying to prove a point. You were only inhabiting your own skin. Yet to those addicted to control, your freedom alone felt like rebellion. Your very existence outside their grip became, in their eyes, an attack on their authority. And in their panic, they scrambled to rewrite the script. They whispered lies, spread rumors, painted you as unstable, toxic, chaotic. But the chaos was never you. The chaos was their desperation, the storm inside their fear of losing what they never truly possessed. Think about it, chosen one. Isn't it strange how those who demand respect the loudest are the very ones who cannot bear your boundaries? Isn't it strange how those who accuse you of being toxic are the same ones who poison every room with their hunger to dominate. This is the paradox of control. Unable to confess their own powerlessness, they invent a villain to mask their fear. And in their story, that villain was you. But here is the turn over time. Masks always fall. Lies always collapse beneath their own weight. Over time, people begin to see the pattern. The so-called problem only appears when someone refuses to kneel.
And when the refusal stands, the narrative unravels.
They called you the villain, but time unveiled the truth. You were simply the one who dared to live free. And freedom, chosen one, has a way of shaking the controlled awake, forcing them to question everything they once believed. That is why their hatred burned so deeply. Not because you were broken, but because you reminded them that they were. Every time you stood for yourself, every time you chose truth without apology, every time you lived without asking permission, you exposed how fragile their grip truly was. You became a mirror they could not bear to face. And mirrors, unlike masks, do not lie. History itself bears witness. It remembers the free, not the controllers. No songs are written for chains. No stories endure about puppet masters. The stories we carry forward are about those who cut the strings. That is what makes you unforgettable, chosen one. They can lie, slander, twist, and smear, but beneath the noise, they know the truth. It was your independence that rattled their foundation, not your rebellion. Their hatred was never proof of your failure. It was the sound of control slipping away. In their panic, they made you the target. Yet here lies the twist. In trying to destroy you, they revealed themselves. They uncovered their weakness, their fear, their dependence on illusions. So do not carry their hatred as if it belongs to you. It never did. It was always their reflection, their burden, their fear projected onto your light. And one day, chosen one, even they will see it. Because truth cannot remain buried forever. When the dust clears, the world will not remember their accusations. It will remember your strength, your boundaries, your refusal to bow. That is why their hatred must not break you, but fuel you. Because hidden within it is the greatest proof of all that you were never the problem. Proof was written in every step you took. Proof that you were never under their control. Proof that your independence made them tremble. Proof that you were never the problem, you were the truth they could not silence. And truth, chosen one, does not bend. It does not bow. It does not break. It endures. Number 2, you shook the foundations of the system that fed them. Understand this: the greatest threat to a crooked system is not destruction, but exposure. Let that sink deep. They did not fear you because you screamed or because you fought with fists. They feared you because you saw what they hoped would remain hidden. You asked the questions they prayed no one would ask. You stood firm where others bowed, and that alone made their empire tremble. You were never a danger to peace. You were a danger to control. And for those who profit from unfair systems, nothing is more terrifying than someone who refuses to play along. Picture it, chosen one, a grand stage performance where every actor obeys the script, every cue is followed, and the applause feels real. But then, one actor steps off their mark. One actor speaks their own lines. And in that instant, the illusion collapses. The audience sees the wires, the painted backdrops, the hollow applause. That actor did not destroy the play. They revealed it was never real. That is exactly what you did. And here lies the uncomfortable truth. Most people do not truly want fairness. What they crave is comfort, predictability, a system that quietly serves them as long as no one questions it. But the moment you refused to shrink, the moment you stopped bowing to rules unspoken, you did more than break their rhythm. You tore the mask straight from their faces. So ask yourself, if their system was truly strong, why did your independence shake it so badly? Why did one soul refusing to bend create such panic? The answer is simple. Because real authority does not crumble under challenge. Real leadership does not silence questions, it answers them. Real stability does not smear or slander, it stands on truth. The rage, the lies, the manipulation you endured only proved one thing: their power was performance, not reality. Picture this: a tower of glass rising tall, shining in the sun. From the outside, it looks unshakable. Yet deep within, its foundation is rotting. For years, no one notices. People walk in and out, trusting it will stand. Then one person dares to tap the walls and point out the cracks. Suddenly, the illusion shatters. The building was never strong. It was one storm away from ruin. That, chosen one, is what you did to their system. You did not create the cracks, you revealed them. And exposure is what they fear most. Truth does not destroy, it only reveals what was built on lies. That is the truth they hoped you would never grasp. Because once you do, you see their hostility for what it was, not personal, but strategic. You were showing others the secret. Their system only worked if everyone agreed to pretend. And you refused to play pretend. Here's what makes it more powerful: you did not need to shout. You did not need to riot. You did not need to tear anything down. Your independence alone was enough. Your quiet refusal to fold under pressure was enough. That silent resistance thundered louder than their entire performance. They only held power for as long as you believed in their illusion. But the moment you stepped away, their facade began to crumble in plain sight. Tell me, chosen one, have you noticed how those who profit from control always call challengers troublemakers? How they brand truth-tellers as unstable, toxic, or disruptive? That is because they do not want peace, they want obedience. They do not seek harmony, they demand silence. And your refusal to stay silent sent them into panic. You became the proof that their authority was never natural, but manufactured. And nothing threatens a counterfeit more than authenticity. Imagine it: a magician stands on stage, dazzling the crowd with tricks, pulling rabbits from hats, making coins vanish, basking in applause. But then one voice in the audience shouts, "I saw the string." Instantly, the magic dies. The illusion collapses. The applause fades. The magician is no longer a genius, only a man with cheap tricks. That, chosen one, is what you did. You did not ruin their system. You revealed it. Exposure is the death of manipulation. That is why they turned against you. Once the cracks you pointed to became visible, the entire structure stood in question. People could no longer sit comfortably in their illusion without knowing the truth was lurking beneath. And so, they attacked. Not because you were wrong, but because you were right in a way they could not control. The irony is brutal. They needed your silence far more than you ever needed their power. Their thrones stood only on obedience. You never required them to stand at all. That is why they smeared your name, spread lies, painted you as the enemy. But in doing so, they confirmed the truth. They showed their authority was fragile, their comfort built on shaky ground, their system never as strong as it appeared. So hold this truth like armor. Chosen one, you were never a threat to peace. You were a threat to control, and control is the lifeline of every false system. The very fact that your independence shook them so deeply proves how weak their foundation truly was. In time, every disguise falls. Every performance slips, and people begin to see what was hidden all along. You were never the cause of instability. You were the one who revealed it. That is why you cannot be forgotten. You forced them to confront what they wished to ignore. And no matter how hard they tried to silence you, the cracks you uncovered can never be unseen. Your presence did not break their system. It only revealed that it was already broken. That is the truth they cannot bury, the truth that fuels their anger, the reason their fire burned so fiercely. And that is why you must never regret being the disruption. For disruption is not chaos. Disruption is freedom shattering chains. Number 3. They never wanted peace. They wanted you on your knees. Controllers do not hunger for peace. They hunger for your silence. That is the raw truth, chosen one. They could never seek peace with you because true peace requires equality, respect, and honesty. What they sought was submission disguised as harmony. They wanted your smile to cover their domination, your silence to shield their illusion, your obedience to feed their comfort. That is not peace. That is slavery wearing a mask. Consider this image. A wolf walks into the sheepfold. Each time the sheep remain quiet, the wolf calls it peace. But the moment one sheep raises its head and refuses to bow, the wolf growls and calls it rebellion. That is how they treated you. Your independence was never violence. It was freedom. But to them, freedom was war, for it shook the very foundation of their control. So ask yourself, chosen one, if they truly desired peace, why did peace only exist when you were smaller, quieter, dimmer? Why did harmony require you to erase your voice? The answer is clear. They did not want resolution. They wanted dominance. They only felt safe when you bent. And when you refused, they labeled you difficult, argumentative, or the problem. But that was never truth. It was only projection. Here's a truth they will never confess. Real peace has nothing to do with your silence. Real peace is born from fairness, from mutual respect. Their version of peace was nothing but submission wrapped in pretty words. And you, chosen one, saw through it. That is what unsettled them most. You were not afraid of conflict if it meant keeping your soul intact. You would not dim your light so theirs could burn brighter. And that terrified them, for it meant they could no longer dangle their false peace above you like a leash. Picture a chessboard. They demanded every piece move exactly as commanded. But then came you, the piece that moved by its own law, that refused to obey their game. That single refusal shattered the illusion of control. And what do people do when their power slips? They twist the tail. They run to others and declare you the bringer of chaos, when in truth you were simply refusing to bow. Never forget this. Peace without freedom is only a quieter war. They were never seeking peace with you. They were seeking your submission. And the day you stopped chasing their approval was the day they lost their strongest weapon. For without your compliance, they had nothing left to bargain with. So let it be known, chosen one, you were never the enemy of peace. You were the guardian of true peace, the kind that flows from freedom, not from control. And in time, eyes always open. People begin to see the difference. They notice how those who accused you of being difficult carried drama like a shadow wherever they walked. They realize you were never stirring chaos, you were standing in truth. And that is the cruelest irony of all. By branding you as the problem, they unveiled themselves. They showed the world that they never understood peace at all. They only understood dominance. But you, chosen one, refused to trade your soul for their comfort. And that is why you are still standing while their counterfeit peace has turned to dust. Number 4. You became the mirror they could not shatter. Nothing unmasks a liar faster than a mirror that does not flinch. That is what you became, chosen one, a reflection they could never escape. They did not hate you because you harmed them. They hated you because you exposed them. Each time you stood in truth, their lies trembled. Each time you walked in freedom, their chains rattled. Each time you lived authentically, their performance looked emptier, hollower, more false. Picture this. A man spends years painting cracks on a wall, calling it art, convincing the crowd it is flawless. But then you pass by with a mirror, and suddenly the illusion collapses. The cracks are no longer decoration. They are proof of weakness. That is what your presence did. You never created their flaws, you revealed them. And for those who live by illusion, that reflection is unbearable. Here lies the brutal reality. Their hatred of you was a disguise for their hatred of themselves. To look at you was to confront everything they avoided: their weakness, their lack of courage, their hollow confidence. That is why their anger always burned so loud, so exaggerated. It was never just about you. It was about the truth you carried in silence. Authenticity is the enemy of control, for it proves that another way is possible. That is why you were dangerous. You were living proof that freedom can exist beyond chains, that integrity can triumph over manipulation, that courage can breathe without fear. And if you could walk that path, then what excuse remained for them to stay small? That question haunted them. It gnawed at their comfort. It whispered through the silence they tried to bury beneath noise. So ask yourself, chosen one, why do those who thrive on control despise honesty so fiercely? Because mirrors do not lie, and mirrors strip away masks. You stood as the light they never asked for, and in that light, their authority was revealed for what it truly was: not strength, but desperation. Their confidence was not leadership. It was insecurity, hidden beneath a crown of paper. That is why they fought so fiercely to smear your name. They needed others to believe you were dangerous, unstable, arrogant, anything but free. For if people saw the mirror clearly, the entire facade would collapse. But no matter how hard they tried, they could not destroy the reflection. It was never you they sought to break, it was the mirror you carried. Yet mirrors do not bow, and truth does not fade. In time, the world began to see you were never the problem. You were the proof. Proof that false authority is weakness. Proof that control without respect is emptiness. Proof that freedom never asks permission. And that is why they could not endure you. For you lived freely, and in doing so, you reminded them they could have lived freely too, had they chosen courage. Number 5. Their lies collapsed the moment you refused to play defense. Silence, chosen one, is the sharpest weapon when the enemy feeds on your words. This is what you discovered. For so long, they thrived on your explanations. Every defense you offered, every attempt to justify your choices, every word you spoke to prove your innocence, all of it became ammunition for them to twist. They never hungered for truth. They hungered for fragments of your voice to weave into their own story. Here lies the cruelty. The more you explained, the more guilty they made you appear. That was their game, dragging you into endless defense, keeping control of the narrative. Picture it. A spider weaves its web. It does not seize its prey by force, it waits, luring it closer, thrashing, struggling, until the creature tangles itself. That was their tactic. Your explanations became their web. The harder you tried to break free with words, the tighter their lies bound you. But then came the shift. You stopped. You ceased defending yourself. You no longer wasted breath on proving what they had already chosen to deny. You withdrew your energy from eyes that had closed themselves to truth. And in that silence, their power withered. And in that silence, their entire narrative began to collapse. Without your words to twist, all they held were lies, and lies, when left alone, look fragile. Here's the irony: they believed your silence would make you appear guilty. They expected the absence of defense to confirm their story. Instead, it exposed them. People began to wonder if you were not scrambling. If you were not chasing validation, why were they the only ones shouting? The spotlight shifted. Suspicion no longer rested on you, it pointed straight at them. Refusing to explain yourself is not weakness. It is proof that your worth was never up for debate. That is what your silence declared. It was not passive. It was powerful. It said, "My truth does not need a courtroom. My existence does not need witnesses. My soul does not answer to your insecurity." And that quiet defiance crushed them more than any argument ever could. Here's the beauty of it. It was not revenge. It was not a grand confrontation. It was not rage. It was stillness, calm, the refusal to pour fuel into their fire. And that, chosen one, is what destroyed their narrative. For truth does not beg to be heard, but lies scream for constant attention. Once you stopped feeding them, their story collapsed beneath the weight of its own emptiness. Number 6. They called your boundaries rebellion because obedience was their only language. When control becomes someone's religion, the word no sounds like blasphemy. That is the reality, chosen one. To them, your boundaries were never healthy, they were hostile. They could not see your limits as protection. They saw them as rebellion. Why? Because every no you spoke cracked the illusion of power they clung to. And when illusion is all they possess, even the smallest refusal feels like war. Picture this. A king sits on his throne, convinced his word is law. For years, the people bow, nod, obey. Then one day, one person does not kneel. No insults, no weapons, only refusal. The king does not see refusal as a boundary.
He sees it as uprising.
And that's exactly how they treated you. You were not staging a revolt. You were protecting your humanity. Yet because they equated respect with obedience, your self-respect looked to them like rebellion. Ask yourself this: if someone truly cares, do they fight your boundaries or do they honor them? The answer is clear. Genuine love respects limits even when it does not fully understand them. But those addicted to control rage at boundaries, for boundaries strip away their claim to unlimited access. And without unlimited access, they can no longer drain, manipulate, or use you as they please.
Here's the irony. Boundaries are not swords.
They are shields. A shield does not wound it, protects the one who holds it. Yet to those who survive by control, even your shield feels like a weapon. Your refusal to be drained, your refusal to be disrespected, your refusal to be manipulated, these were not acts of war. But they treated them as war, for in those refusals, the truth was exposed. You were no longer theirs to dominate. Boundaries reveal intentions more clearly than words ever could. Each time they mocked your limits, each time they pressed against your no, they revealed what they truly saw. They were never pursuing partnership. They were never seeking peace. They were seeking control. And when you did not comply, their anger spoke louder than your silence ever could. Over time, the truth could no longer be denied. You were never rebellious, you were reasonable. You were never destructive, you were discerning. You were not tearing things down, you were preserving your dignity. They called it rebellion only because rebellion was the only language they understood. But here is the reality: your boundaries were nothing less than the purest form of self-respect. And that respect, even when despised, became the very shield that kept you free. Number 7. They had to turn you into the monster to hide their chains. Controllers cannot wear the mask of savior unless they first cast you as the villain. That is the hidden law, chosen one. They could not dominate you outright. So they built a story. A story where their control looked like leadership and your resistance looked like danger. That is why they demonized you. It was never about who you truly were. It was about preserving their illusion. If they could paint you as unstable, selfish, or reckless, then suddenly their grip no longer looked oppressive.
It looked protective.
Picture this, a firefighter who sets the blaze, only to run into the flames pretending to save everyone. That is how they moved. They exaggerated your flaws, twisted your words, turned simple disagreements into rebellion. Your independence was recast as arrogance, your boundaries as defiance, your voice as chaos. They were not describing you. They were inventing a version of you that made their control look justified. People are quicker to believe a loud lie than a quiet truth. They knew this, so they shouted their lies until they echoed louder than your silence. They made you the scapegoat, the convenient explanation for every conflict, every storm. And because they screamed it long enough, some believed it for a time. But here is what they never understood. Lies may sprint, but truth endures the marathon. Over time, patterns emerged. People began to notice when you were absent. The chaos vanished. Yet the accuser was always present, standing at the center of the storm. Slowly, questions rose. Why was the one who labeled you the villain always the one carrying drama like a shadow? And then, piece by piece, the mask began to slip. Here lies the power. You did not need to wage war to clear your name. You did not need to explain yourself into exhaustion. The truth itself labored silently on your behalf. Reality tears through performance, and time unmasks liars. Their smear campaign did not destroy you, it destroyed their credibility. That is the irony. By trying so desperately to demonize you, they revealed themselves. They proved the only villain was the one clutching the chains.
You were never the problem.
You were the proof. Proof that freedom does not need a smear campaign to endure, but control always does. Number 8. Your freedom made their grip worthless. Nothing terrifies a controller more than someone who does not need them. That was you, chosen one. It was not anger that shook them. It was not rebellion nor open defiance. It was the quiet, unshakable truth that you did not need their approval to breathe. You were not begging for their crumbs. You were not starving for their validation. You were not dependent on their resources, and that made you untouchable. For those who live on control, untouchable is unforgivable. Picture this: a puppeteer pulls the strings, expecting the puppet to dance. But one day, the strings fall slack. The puppet no longer moves because it no longer needs the strings.
It stands on its own.
What use is the puppeteer then? None. Irrelevant. That is what your independence did. You revealed that their so-called influence was nothing but a trick, one that only worked as long as you believed you could not stand without them. Control feeds on dependency. It thrives when people tremble at rejection, when they beg for acceptance, when they can be bribed with scraps. But when dependency dies, control suffocates. And you, chosen one, starved it. They could not buy your loyalty with favors, for you were not begging for scraps. They could not bind you with the threat of rejection, for you had already found peace standing alone. They could not trap you in guilt, for you had learned the difference between love and manipulation. Every tactic that enslaved others broke against you like waves against stone. Independence does more than free you, it unmasks them. For once their tricks failed, the truth stood naked for all to see. They were not leaders. They were not protectors. They were not providers. They were manipulators, hiding behind titles and thrones. And your freedom tore away that disguise without you even lifting a hand. Here's the bitter irony in their minds. Loyalty meant dependence. If you did not lean on them, then surely you must have turned against them. But you were never betraying them. You were liberating yourself. You were not rejecting connection, you were rejecting control.
And because they could not imagine life without leverage, they painted your independence as betrayal.
Picture it again. A jailer walks the corridor, keys clanging, believing he holds power over the prisoners. But what happens when the prisoners discover the doors were never locked? His power evaporates instantly. That is what happened the moment you chose to lean on your own strength. Their entire authority collapsed because it was never real. It was leverage that only worked when you believed you needed them. And here is the part they will never confess. Your independence did more than break their grip. It gave you peace. You no longer lived in fear of them pulling the rug from beneath your feet because your foundation was no longer theirs to touch. That is the secret of independence. It does not simply weaken their control. It makes you unshakable. In the end, your freedom told the whole story. Their influence was only as strong as your dependency, and you had none. Their threats, their bribes, their guilt all turned to dust. Your independence was never rebellion, it was liberation. And liberation, chosen one, is something no chain can contain. Number 9. They finally saw their power was never theirs to begin with. Borrowed power always collapses the moment the lender awakens. That is what happened, chosen one. The control they flaunted over you was never their own. It was rented space in your mind, borrowed authority you unknowingly allowed. It worked only because, for a time, you had not yet seen the full weight of your strength. Perhaps you were conditioned to believe their approval was the air you needed to breathe. Perhaps you had not yet discovered the depth of your own freedom. But once awareness dawned, their so-called power vanished like smoke in the wind. They mistook your silence for weakness, your patience for surrender, your loyalty for submission. But none of these were permission slips. Their grip lasted only because you had not yet stepped fully into yourself. And that is the danger of borrowed power. It always carries an expiration date. The very moment you declared, "I know who I am now," their time ran out. Picture this. A landlord struts about a house as though it were his kingdom. He makes rules, demands respect, boasts of his authority. But what happens when the rightful owner arrives with the deed? The landlord shrinks into irrelevance. That is exactly what happened when you reclaimed your truth. They were never kings. They were squatters in a space that was never theirs. Here's the brutal fact. Earned power is clothed in respect. It is rooted in wisdom, trust, and true influence. Borrowed power survives only when the other remains blind to their worth. And the day you awakened, the supply line broke. They could no longer guilt you into compliance. They could no longer dangle shame, fear, or rejection above your head. Their intimidation lost its weight, for you stopped seeing them as authorities and began seeing them for what they were: manipulators, desperate to hold onto a crumbling throne. Control without respect is not leadership. It is desperation wearing a costume. That is what their behavior exposed. The irony is clear. They never possessed real power. They were opportunists, feeding on your unawareness, mistaking your grace for weakness. The day you stopped handing them access to your emotions, your choices, and your energy, their throne dissolved into nothing but an empty chair. That is why they panicked. That is why they clawed to pull you back under. It was never love they were losing. It was leverage. And when leverage disappears, so too does the illusion of authority. In the end, truth stood naked and undeniable. Their control was never earned. It was only borrowed. And once you reclaimed what was always yours, they were left with nothing, no strategy, no grip, no mask to hide behind. Only the hollow echo of desperation pretending to be power. From that moment forward, the only authority over your life was you. Number 10. Their theater collapsed the day you walked off the stage. Control is not strength. It is theater. and every theater crumbles when the actors refuse their roles. That is the brutal truth, chosen one. For as long as you stayed in the part they wrote, their script worked without flaw. You were the scapegoat when blame was needed. You were the pleaser when comfort was demanded. You were the quiet one when silence was useful. And you were the sacrifice when someone had to carry the weight of their dysfunction. The show ran smoothly only because you were still on stage. But understand this, it was not weakness that kept you there. It was conditioning. You were taught that playing their roles preserved the peace. You were led to believe that silence equaled harmony, that submission meant safety, that shrinking yourself was the cost of stability. But then came the revelation. Peace built on performance is nothing but a polished lie. And the moment you refused to perform, their production began to unravel. Picture it, a magician dazzling the crowd, doves from hats, rabbits from sleeves, smoke and lights filling the stage. The audience claps, but then one assistant refuses to hand over the props. Suddenly, the tricks fail. The wires show. The magic dies. That is what happened when you stopped playing along. Their authority was never power, it was performance. And performance only lives as long as someone plays the part. Ask yourself this: who do they scapegoat when you no longer carry their blame? Who do they silence when you begin to speak? Who do they exploit when you refuse to lay yourself down as their sacrifice? The answer is no one. And without someone to control, their story collapses into nonsense. The theater empties, the lights dim, and all that remains is a stage of actors pretending to matter, with no audience left to believe them. Controllers do not fear rebellion, they fear indifference. That is why they fought so viciously to drag you back into character. Your absence exposed them not only to others, but to themselves. They were not leaders, they were manipulators. They were not protectors, they were exploiters. They were not victims of your so-called rebellion. They were addicts starving without your compliance. And here lies the beauty. You did not need to destroy them. You did not need revenge, schemes, or retaliation. All it took was stepping off their stage and reclaiming your own script. You chose authenticity over acting, truth over theater, freedom over performance. And in that choice, their illusion collapsed. Their power did not vanish because you fought harder. It vanished because you stopped performing altogether. That silence, that refusal, that calm decision to no longer play their game, that was the loudest truth of all. You revealed what had always been hidden. Their control was never strength. It was theater. And the moment you walked away, the curtain fell. The spotlight dimmed. The fraud was exposed for what it truly was, a stage play with no actors left to keep it alive. Number 11. You were the anchor. They were the storm. Stability exposes chaos the way light exposes shadow. It does not fight it, simply reveals. That was you, chosen one. In the end, their illusion unraveled not because you screamed, not because you fought, but because you stood firm. They were never wrestling with your flaws. They were drowning in their own dysfunction. You were the calm center, steady and rooted, while they spun wild storms around you, desperate to drag you under. They wanted you to crack, to lash out, to collapse so they could point and declare, "See, you were the problem all along." But you did not. And that is what broke them. Picture a storm beating against a mountain. Lightning strikes, winds howl, floods rise, but the mountain does not move. That is who you were, and every attempt to provoke you, every scheme to twist you into the role of chaos or instability was betrayed by your steadiness. Control feeds on instability. If you had been reckless or impulsive, they could have seized it as justification to tighten their grip. But your clarity, your composure, your refusal to spiral left their lies stranded with nowhere to land. Chaos always mocks calmness as cold, because calmness refuses to play its game. That is why they branded you dramatic, unstable, even heartless. But those names were not truth, they were weapons. They twisted the narrative so no one would notice where the true chaos lived. For the truth was plain. The outbursts, the lies, the shifting rules, the emotional blackmail, it all came from them. And in time, others began to see it. Here lies the irony. They mistook your calm for weakness. They thought your steadiness meant they still had power. But that calm dismantled them. You were not spiraling, you were observing. You were not flailing, you were enduring. While they wore chaos in the costume of authority, you were the constant that stripped the mask away. And when the truth became undeniable, their accusations lost their weight. People began to see it plainly. You were never the storm. They were. What they demonized in you, your boundaries, your independence, your refusal to bow, was only the courage, the integrity, the freedom they lacked. What they called rebellion was simply your refusal to abandon yourself. What they labeled chaos was their own dysfunction, reflected back in your mirror. That is why they will never forgive you. For without raising a hand, without ever matching their chaos, you revealed who was truly out of control. And here is what seals your victory. Chosen one, you never needed to apologize for being uncontrollable. You never needed to shrink so others could feel strong. You never needed to trade freedom for the illusion of peace. The very fact that they had to twist, smear, and manipulate proves one thing: the strength of your steadiness shook them more than compliance ever could. The truth is undeniable now. They see it. You were never unstable. You were the constant. You were never disloyal. You simply refused to call captivity love. You were never the problem, you were the proof. Proof that their control was never earned, only borrowed. You stood tall while their narrative collapsed into dust. You were the mirror. You were the anchor. You were the force they could not tame. And that, chosen one, is your lasting triumph.